My name is Jose, and you guys know me as the Chief Education Officer of the Skool, and the lovely Tatiana Luthi, who is one of our lead coaches, is going to be co-moderating. And she told me that a good majority of you guys, with the exception of a few dorky people, are creative people. Is that correct? Who's a creative? Writer, strategist, designer? Holy crap. I think everybody's creative, yeah. So that's good. So that's important because that gives us a context from which to talk about. And the topic was chosen by Diego from Oshyn, and the reason why he chose the topic is because of the complexity of execution when it comes to all of the different devices, all of the different platforms, and all the different screens. How many of you do 45% of your browsing on a mobile browser? That's statistically about the right amount. I myself have really shifted, and a lot of my time is spent on my phone. I'm pretty sure yours is too. So let's get the party started talking about the challenges of the complexity and why we chose this topic, but really importantly also introducing our awesome panelists and who they are and why they're here and what their interests are in the topic. So guys, just basically introduce yourself, your company, what the company does, and what is it about this topic that you're either excited about or that you would like to share with us this morning.
All right, so I'm Skot Carruth. My company is Philosophie. We do a lot of design and development work, particularly with on digital products and with early stage companies as well as with brands and agencies.
I'm Chris Doe, and I run a design motion graphics centric company doing live action, animation, visual effects, and that's my area of expertise.
What's the name of the company?
It's called Blind.
And my name is Chris Stauffer. I'm the CEO of Stauffer. We are a development shop that partners with a lot of marketing and branding and advertising agencies. We've got about 25 people, and we focus primarily on the Drupal content management system.
Awesome. And my name is Diego Rebosio, and I'm the CEO of Oshyn, and we are an enterprise-level content management and development shop here in Los Angeles. All right, so Scott, tell me a little bit about your interest in the topic and what is it that fascinates you about ubiquitous design and what it means to you.
Right, so first of all, ubiquitous design is kind of an uncommon term. It can mean a lot of things. I think that one thing that we're concerned about for our clients is being able to have sort of brand consistency across all of their different touch points, across any device, get their message across in an appropriate way, whether someone's looking on mobile device or on a tablet at home or at the bus stop, etc. So it's very complex to try to understand the needs and the motivations of users in these different contexts, and it's also complex to develop for them, right? To create applications or websites, for instance, that are going to look good and provide that appropriate content in those different ways. So very complicated thing. We're always talking about it. We use techniques like responsive design or adaptive design, which we might introduce more later. It's just always an interesting thing.
One clarification question for Chris Doe. One of the things that you're doing recently is doing cross-channel design projects, meaning from TV to mobile to physical location. So, what do you feel the importance of design, or how has it changed how you address design because of all the different platforms, or are there still some basic elements that are important, whether it be typography, whether it be identity, whether it be brand? What do you feel is the most important thing now that you're designing across so many platforms?
Well, that's a heavy-duty question there. For me, I don't know if I look at things as compartments, and I think the way things are moving, the lines are blurring. And so when we're doing a traditional broadcast project, that's going to live on TV, it's going to live on the web, and so to me, it's still the basic principles of design that I would apply, whether it's print, video, or web related. And I think the two things I was thinking about when we're designing a motion project is it's clarity and drama. So, and I think those same principles can be applied to whatever you're doing. So clarity, the enemy of that is confusion. You have too many things on the page. You can't figure out where to look first. And so that's the same thing in motion. The other thing is dramatic, or creating something that has some drama to it. And so the enemy of that is boredom, because, okay, now it's clear, but nobody cares. And so when we're looking at a site, it's like, how are you drawing the user in? What kind of story are you telling? And how does that build a narrative? And I think that's where it kind of blurs together for me.
Interesting. Regardless. So you're bringing up an issue of being able to build a narrative not only on the specific content types, but across all the entire experience. So there's a narrative arc that has to live, across device, across screen, across. So that does make it a little bit more complicated, and we can come back to that in terms of what's important. And Diego has a very specific point of view as to what matters now that that's the case. But you mentioned the words responsive and the words adaptive, which are two terms that we've thrown. Does anybody want to know the specific definition of those, or can we argue about those? Huh? They're the same thing. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, first of all, let's have Chris Stauffer give your point of view as a dorky human on the differences between adaptive, responsive, fluid, all those kind of terms that are confusing the hell out of all of us.
Okay, so they're responsive and adaptive are not the same. They're not the same at all, actually. So the difference is kind of on the way that you approach writing your code, which is also directly related to the way that the designers end up designing the system. So adaptive, I'm going to go a little nerdy on you here for a second. When a device requests something from a web server, we know what that device is. And then we can respond back to the end user with a different set of HTML dependent on which device it is. So what that does is it gives you the ability to have, for example, a regular desktop website that was designed in one fashion that could be completely different from the way that a mobile website might be delivered back to the consumer. So in my recent experience, we designed the mobile application for LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And for them, their website is in Drupal and is one setup and looks a specific way. It is branded for LACMA, but then the mobile experience is a completely different experience, and it is device dependent, and those experiences change based on which device is requesting the web server. A responsive website is one that actually is the same design that simply adjusts based on the screen size that the user has. So what a lot of people kind of think of, and a lot of people use the word fluid design in this respect as well. I'm going to put that over here, because it gives them the ability to design a set of kind of like blocks or a grid on the page, and that grid may collapse based on usually the width of the user's screen. So for example, on our Stauffer.com site, we would have, maybe one kind of media rotator that might show up in the middle, and that could actually adjust down to be a little smaller. And then underneath that, we have 3 bricks. Well, when you're looking at the 3 bricks on a desktop, they're aligned horizontally. But then when you open it up on your iPhone, each one of the 3 bricks collapse under. So it's still the same content, still the same design. It just responds to the size of the user's screen and then changes accordingly. Make sense?
Question from the young lady.
So based on what you just said, is it correct to say that adaptive is contingent on the device?
Yes.
And responsive is contingent on the browser that's being used, the size, the screen size? Okay.
First of all, I'm going to say something crazy. It doesn't matter that much. Diego, do you want to come on up? We have a coffee cup holding your spot. It introduced itself earlier. the way that I try to look at it is one that the device specificity, and Diego can probably talk a little bit about this. I'll give you an example. I look at adaptive as adapting the content to a new format for a mobile device, where I look at responsive as it's the same site, same code base, and it just responds to the size of the browser. And he's saying that LACMA is actually more of a hybrid because you also have an app. It's two completely different sites. Got it. Two different experiences. Same data is being pulled. So the one thing that I wanted to say is that it doesn't matter as much which, when it comes to content and when it comes to the narrative and when it comes to creative, you want them to look the same. It does matter when it comes to some of the development issues. Diego, you came up with this topic, and you have another question. You want to have a follow-up there? And I want to ask Diego something afterwards.
Because I want to make sure we're really clear about this.
Somebody's going to say this, somebody's going to say that.
So you said with adaptive, the content stays the same with the device, or the content adjusts dependent on the device. So does that mean we have to
adapt the content and just subtract content if you want?
But does that mean we have to design now multiple devices?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the main differences between responsive versus adaptive is usually when I get a design assets from a designer, I'll get one PSD file for a responsive site, and then usually instructions, usually in wireframes, that'll tell me how it's going to logically collapse. Versus when I get adaptive design comps, I may, for example, get a set of comps that apply for mobile, then I'll get another set of comps that apply for a tablet, and then another set of comps that apply to desktop. So I might actually have to build that 3 times. And one of the main compelling reasons or arguments for responsive design is it ends up being a hell of a lot cheaper on the tech side, because one of my engineers is then writing, I'm going to call it like maybe 1.3 times the code of just doing it in desktop versus 3 times if I was doing it in adaptive. So that's kind of one of the primary reasons why responsive is just killing it in the marketplace nowadays.
Let's go into the audience here. Right here.
I was just going to say, if you have a native...
Tell us your name.
My name is John Scheipel, a consulting CTO, freelance CTO. So if you have a native application, are you therefore like forced into adaptive just because you have a website version, then you have a native iPhone, that you're by definition, you're adaptive then?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it really kind of depends. I've seen some instances where people will have a native app, but it's not really an app. Really what it is an HTML5 app that's not native, really. But inside of the App Store. So you could do that technically in responsive.
Go responsive and adaptive, meaning you take your web version, let's say laptop, desktop web, do it in mobile in a browser, and then later adapt it native. What do you guys think of that strategy?
I actually think that that's a good idea. I tell clients all the time that, step 1 is have some method of getting on mobile, and it doesn't always have to be an app, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper to do a responsive website that works on mobile first, and then you've at least addressed a mobile audience. And then later on, if time, scope, and budget afford itself, then we can build you an app too. And if you do it right, you could have like a back-end set of web services that then serve up that same content to the actual app.
So Diego, you have a few points of view as to why a client should choose to do one or the other, which is what John just asked. Why should a client choose one strategy versus the other?
Well, I think in general, I agree with what Chris was saying in that you should try and first start with the mobile website as opposed to a native app. And the reason is that you're going to need to manage multiple code bases if you start doing native apps. And people often underestimate the amount of effort both at the beginning and over a long period of time of maintaining multiple code bases. In a way, doing the ubiquitous design is a way of trying to manage that by at least not having multiple designs, but instead having one design that you can adapt to the multiple ones. just to clarify something you said, John, when we talk about adaptive or responsive design, at least to me, those are HTML5 words or HTML words. So when you're going into talking about native apps, I mean, it depends, but
Why should there be that?
well, because there's specific mechanisms that are used to implement one or the other that are really HTML code that we're talking about. But for example, if you're doing an iOS app, you just by the way it's already laid out for you by Apple, you kind of have to do adaptive, and you have essentially one set of storyboards for your iPhone, another set of storyboards for your iPad, right? To some degree, the iPhone one maybe helps to accommodate a couple of form factors, the smaller screen, the bigger screen, but essentially you're doing adaptive design. But you're not doing you're not doing it the HTML way. You're simply redrawing everything, right? But I think that the principle of what we're trying to get to here is you should try and think when you design that you may one day make this a native app as well. Whether it be on Android or in iOS or in something else, Windows or whatever comes up next. So keep that in mind when you design, but stick to HTML5 first, unless your business really justifies doing something else.
Hi, I'm Gautam. So it sounds like this is really more project management or process than design.
It is. Is that a comment? And money. So the Gautam's, your comment is that it's about project management and process and design. I'm going to do a cheat sheet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on our blog so that you guys have it from a definition standpoint. Here's what I do as a designer to address the issues as they come up. So one of the concerns people might have is like, oh my God, what do I do in this situation? I don't have enough mobile in my portfolio, or I don't have enough, tablet, or I haven't done any ITV projects. Whatever the I don't have, or whatever the I am about to do fears are, what I do is the following. I understand that it's about the viewport, meaning the size of what the content is. I also understand that at a basic level, there is differences between a browser and an app in terms of what's possible. The way that I do it is I really research what's out there, and I talk to the dorky people when it comes to what are the things that we need from a strategic standpoint for the client, and I really begin designing within that. And if you guys watch This Week in Web Design, there's several episodes, but there's one on responsive design on how to do HTML responsive. There's a few episodes on mobile and how to design for mobile, and I'll have those links in the blog post. But the key is, and I want to move the conversation forward into some broader, more creative and strategic things, the key is that you can figure those things out, but that the idea of designing everywhere is here to stay, and we now have to move forward to, all right, what are ways that you cope with that from a user experience standpoint? So it really is about the instance in which the user is interacting with you, with your brand, with whatever they might be doing with you, and where. So at what point and in what location they might be, with what device, etc. So talking about user experience, and I saw that you're teaching at General Assembly user experience. How do you teach designers and folks about this issue of designing across device and across view screens or ports when it comes to managing the process of designing for that, Scott?
So the fundamental design process is called user-centered design, and this has been around a very long time. Whether you look back at human factors and ergonomics in the 50s, or HCI, human-computer interaction, in the 60s and 70s, these are fields that emerged, and really the key to designing good experiences is understanding the users and their motivations. So these things break down into internal motivations. So why is someone coming to your site? What are their goals? What are their greater life objectives, right? Trying to understand those insights is very important. And then the second is the external factors. What is the context in which they're using it? How are they, how are they feeling? Did they just get in a car accident? The example I just gave is, or I often give, is if you're designing some sort of insurance app that people are only going to use when they've had a car accident, well, you have to really consider the state of someone's mind, the chaos that's around them in order to create a good experience. You can't just say, oh, it needs to have this, 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 and this, because those are the things that our company does. So let's put them on the interface and make it look good. So user-centered design is all about user insight, researching your users, prototyping things, and trying them out in the most similar context to how people will actually use it. And it doesn't matter if you're designing for a website or a mobile app or an HTML5 mobile app or a Google Glass or a television screen, or you're making a movie. Like, the better you understand your users and design for what they need, the better it's going to be.
That's fantastic. You bring up an example that I think is indirectly there. Something that I noticed as a great example of what you shouldn't do is I've seen an insurance company or two having apps and having ads about the apps for filing a claim. Now think about it. Someone, like he said, just gets in a car accident. Are they really going to be looking in the App Store for their app? Right, they're going to be browsing the web, but they're not going to install the app. They're not going to install the app, and they're just going to go to the mobile site. So why did you build the app? It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, maybe if part of the idea is to say, oh, my brand has the coolest stuff, that's the only reason I can think of, but it certainly doesn't make sense from a usability point of view.
So there's an argument brewing here. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm not sure it's an argument, but I would say that as a consultant, one thing that I've come to learn the hard way is that sometimes your users are not who you think they are. They're not necessarily your customers. They're also your stakeholders, your shareholders in the case of a company like that. The competitive space, so what are the other brands doing? How do you have to look in their eyes at a trade show, So there are really... Exactly, and it's a relevant one, right? So when I design, I realize that I'm not only designing for my clients' users. I wish that was the case, because then they'd have the best experience. But I'm also designing for my client, right? You have to make them happy too. They're a user in this case.
So there's a danger in that, and I'm not going to admonish clients. I actually want to talk to Chris Doe about this a little bit, and actually, and to Chris Stauffer, to the Chris's in the middle. So recently, Chris, you worked on a project for a large storage company, and you got a chance to use the user experience process as the foundation for the whole brand. You got a chance to use the Skool OS. I'm curious, and the reason for this is during our practice session, Diego mentioned that in what we're talking about, that now design has become more important, that user experience has become more important, is what Scott's saying. And paying attention to this, what was your experience designing from a strategic point of view, based on users, based on brand attributes, based on business goals, something that sometimes is left to the agency or to the client to give you when you're designing a motion graphics piece? Here, we actually had to get it out of the client, so we were behaving as consultants. Give me your how it occurred for you, your experience as a designer and as a principal in an agency. How was that process for you?
Going through that process myself of defining who the users are and having a better understanding of the users, it really drives the design decisions. And so when I can sit down with the designers that are working on the project, we're not making a subjective or arbitrary decisions. They're educated guesses, but they're kind of based on the client's understanding of their own users and their customers. And so that informs us about the typography, the colors that we're using, because it needs to speak to a very specific audience. So for example, if the demographic is primarily female, age 35 or something like that, that's a very different looking site than it would be for young tech guys or playing Xbox or something like that. That's very different. And so to me, it was very kind of insightful to go through that process and design from the user's point of view. Most of what we do generally in motion design is we get a script and we start designing frames that look cool, that communicate the idea, but we're not talking about who the end user is. So that's a very different approach for us.
It's a new thing.
It is a new thing for us.
Yeah. And Chris, in the technology world, one of the things that happens a lot is the negotiation in terms of features and functionality versus price versus time and money, which John brought up really adamantly. Have you seen that a user-driven process where we do those things at the beginning of a project, does it help in any way from a features and functionality and a tech point of view for you?
Yeah, actually it helps out a lot. I mean, going through and using an agile methodology that is user-centric really does matter. A current example of that for me is one of my clients is a company called the Celestine Agency, and they do basically hair and makeup for, like, say you're going to shoot the cover of Vogue, you'd call them and they would actually give you your hair and makeup artists. So for them, their primary use case is one of their clients, say, they work for Vogue, is looking to hire a hair and makeup person. So the primary use case is the Vogue person calls in and says, okay, well, I'm going to be shooting a model that's, I don't know, a 6 foot, skinny African-American woman. Who do you have that specializes in makeup for that? And then they will go through, curate a gallery of images, and then email the customer or the potential client or customer a link to their website. So the use case that before was failing and that they now realize matters is we originally developed only a desktop website for them. But really the only use case that they have for mobile is the ability to look at a gallery. So their original request to me was, can you redevelop the entire site so that it's fully responsive and so that we're handling, a mobile website as well. But when we really started going through and really kind of grinding them on what the features and functionality were, really the only thing that they care about on mobile is the ability to look at that customized gallery. And so once we've identified the fact that all they care about on a mobile is to look at a customized gallery and then have their, contact information on there, we were able to actually satisfy all of their requirements and use cases for a much smaller price than what was originally scoped. Because once we figured out, okay, well, who's the user of your mobile app? Well, it's that agent that's hiring the person. What do they care about? Images. That's all they care about. They already have the contact information. They already have everything else, on the website. So if that's the only real use case that matters, we can address that and then actually hit a budget that's affordable by the client, because they did not want to pay to have us redesign the entire website to include all the features and functionality. So,
Great approach. So you used the definition of the users and the specific use case, basically to limit the budget to the instance that they cared about in the mobile environment, and the rest you didn't build, versus they actually had asked you originally to build everything, but it was too expensive. And they didn't want to hear that price. Gotcha. Any questions so far that have come up? And the ladies here on the left, you said that some questions might come up as coffee kicks in, or are you still good? All right, go to them.
I don't know if this is really hey, it's Godem again. It's not so much a tech question, but rather what I'm finding now that design is everywhere, that it's having a negative effect on me. When I fire up the app, I get a banner. I go to a website, suddenly there's a skyscraper. I see a TV ad, and it's all almost like the same exact thing everywhere, not necessarily representing that medium. It's essentially the same thing everywhere, rather than, oh, well, if this is motion, you can still tell the same story. But it's almost like this cut and paste out of a style guide, and they're just plastering it everywhere. And the medium itself, they're not using it in the best way it should be used.
Medium-specific scenarios.
Well, you see a television ad, and then you see a billboard, and they look identical. One's giant print, one's a screen with moving things. And then you see an ad banner, and it looks just like the billboard shrunk down. It's almost like they took the creative and just put it on a Xerox machine and scaled it up or scaled it down, as opposed to saying, oh, let's do something specific for that. That leverages that. So for an example, when I see an Apple ad, it doesn't look like the packaging that the product came in, but I'm finding, at least out there, things are just looking almost identical, and it becomes like, God, get away from me! I can't stand you.
I think I have in your observation, I have a question. I have an actual question for the panel for Diego specifically. So what you're saying is that that advertising and marketing agencies and their clients have the tendency to put everything across different platforms and devices without too much thought into what the specific platform or device can do. It all looks the same. You're getting the same content repurposed for the size. So how do we really go beyond that? And this comes to a question for Diego as it relates to design and as it relates to technology. And what I will say to all of you who are here today, this morning, whether you're a technologist, a user experience designer, or a writer or something else, is that the future is about context and about providing that as high fidelity as possible to the user in the context of where they are. So recently I was reading an email, somebody unsubscribed from our email list and he was telling me why, and I was like, oh, boom, and I hit the car in front of me. And yes, I used the phone to do the claim, but not with an app. I just took pictures so it was all interrelated, and I just added that because it was funny. But the question as to what the app should be and the content it should have is very much the same as what advertising should be in the context it should have. You know, Esurance having a really cool app does help if it's usable to do that, take care of that accident. There's a quote in Advertising Age many months ago, about 6 months ago, where it said the future of advertising is in context and content and information. So it's all about a lot of content. Raise your hand if you're a user experience designer or UX or IA kind of type person, really, really high. You're kind of sneaking in, but you are. That's true. You're probably the most important people in the room when it comes to the future, because that's really what has to happen, is what I call high fidelity design for the particular format, the particular context. Now, that said, the fact that advertising is lazy, that aside, are there ways that technology can help personalize the content relative to platform, relative to who the user is, relative to the point of time and the use that they need to do? What are the things that you found in content platforms like Sitecore, et cetera? And for example, for the Writers Guild, in the proposal we put together for them, we talked about how to personalize the content specifically to the particular user and the device. What do you think about that, technology as a mediator for experience?
Well, I probably shouldn't speak any client specifics, but just broadly, I think that there is a happy medium to the point you were saying about, okay, the same design cut and paste everywhere, maybe it's just annoying. But I think it's important, and even more important now that there's a lot of different platforms, that your brand be coherent and that you stick to the essence of that and make sure that people know that, hey, it's you that is launching this app or has this other website or this other kind of service. I think it's actually more important because it's easier to diverge and just quickly throw an app out there, right? And not even bother to style it, and okay, then people don't know that is your brand. And so your brand starts to get, to lose value. So there's other ways to make the experience more relevant and more interesting. And part of that is what Jose was saying, is to start, tailoring the experience to who you are. So if you're someone that, say, goes to a website and, let's say we're talking about car insurance, right? You're going to that website and you're always looking at insurance for your teenager that just got a car, right? Then it makes sense for you next time that you go on your mobile phone to have something that's relevant content about that, like maybe, hey, here are some tips for how to, teach your kids how to drive, or other content that is more relevant to you. And so you can make the content more relevant based on what you know about the person. But I think you need to still keep the brand intact as much as possible, because otherwise it takes away from the experience instead of enhancing it.
That answers a little bit. You're talking specifically about in the context of non-advertising type of things, functional things. But Chris has a comment, and then Chris has a comment.
Yeah, one of the things I would say, to address Gautam's comment is that I think when you're a designer and you're designing across platforms, you should also take into account what those specific platforms can do better than what other platforms can do. So for example, I worked on a Facebook campaign for Caress Women's Body Wash, and the whole campaign was around finding your everyday fabulous. So for that campaign, using a phone to have the ability for women to take pictures to upload to become part of the sweepstakes makes a whole lot of sense, to have that actually baked into the phone with the ability to take the picture with the phone to enter into the sweepstakes. They also did have the Find Your Everyday Fabulous campaign like in stores, but obviously there's no interaction with the consumer or anything like that. When we were going through the Facebook app for that, we utilized the ability for them to send it to their other friends for contest entries. So even though it may have looked a lot of the same across the different mediums, when it was inside of the Facebook app, well, Facebook is social. So let's take advantage of the social side of that. When you're inside of mobile, okay, great. So now you can do things like location-based services or, take pictures and things like that, which gives you the ability to take advantage of that particular medium. So you may have one cross-platform campaign, but you should still kind of push the envelope with each device or context that that campaign is going to be present within.
It's awesome comment. And Chris, and then all the way down the line.
Yeah, I think with Gautam's comment, I think there's a difference between a marketing message versus an application or a website, where he's responding to the kind of cookie cutter, same image everywhere, and it's kind of annoying him or something right? Whereas I think from an application or a web experience, you want it to be consistent across the platforms, and while taking advantage of the individual platform itself. Here's an example that I've experienced. Like, I wish the designers that make the mobile app would then make the desktop app, because when you're designing for mobile, it's really simple. They understand that you have limited dexterity and there's only so many functions that you can do. I find the Pinterest app to be better functioning as an app than it is on the desktop experience, because it's easier for me to pin, group, and organize things. It makes guesses for me as to where I put things, and so it's kind of anticipating my next step. So that's all I have to say about that.
That's awesome. Context does provide a lot.
Yeah, I have two things to say. The first is that brand designers, identity design, people, high-level marketing positions, CMOs maybe, have to have a broader understanding of the places where their brands may appear now and in the future. I think when you see a new form of advertising and then the brand is poorly executed on it, it might be because the people who are creating that execution, the agency or the internal marketing department, may be bound by certain brand guidelines that were created years ago, before the new medium came. So I think keeping your brand guidelines up to date and having awareness of them when you're designing the brand could help. The second thing is that those people involved in the execution of marketing campaigns need to be more user experience oriented, right? So a marketing campaign has a user experience. UX is not just about an app that's interactive, right? And can I accomplish my task? When you're perceiving anything, there's an experience there. And I think that marketing people should be thinking in the same way that interaction designers do, which is, why are they on the site? Why did we choose to put this, ad on the site in the first place? And how can we make it contextualized somehow? And those two things combined could help to create a better user experience for advertisements. To expand on that just a tiny bit, I would say that we do have more and more data about what consumers are doing, right? There's so many cookies tracking you have no idea. And really, I think a lot of people understand this conceptually, that they're being tracked and that people know what their habits are online and what they're doing. But the truth is, to execute on that well takes a genius. It's really, really, really difficult to comprehend, like, okay, we have thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. We have all this big data on them. How do we use that to stratify user groups and then start serving up different programs for them? It's exceptionally difficult to execute on. So I think that you have to bring it all together, have a user experience orientation, but also have those really smart analytical marketing people to change it. And it's happening slowly because it's so hard.
And I want Tatiana to ask questions because she usually helps clarify. But something that I just think, and I'm going to recap what I'm hearing really, this is usually your job, but user experience is becoming far more important. The data is so vast that it's a big challenge. But what I'm hearing from you is that what's becoming more important, and this panel is an example of that we have UX, design, dorky, that the comfort level between, flaky, evil, dorky, evil, flaky. Not disparaging anybody; those are their actual profiles. The importance of collaboration and of talking to each other and of understanding each other's interests becomes even more important. And then second, the importance of high fidelity engagement with your customer becomes even more important, meaning that there's data and there is meeting the customer. Like I call it the difference between dry humping and doing it. Is there clarity there? People used to have the
Come up with a new one.
yeah, it's a little bit inappropriate, and this early in the morning it might be not great. But meaning that if you look at data or if you have assumptions and you use that to design, that's great. Now, how awesome would it be that if you then, not just with user testing or with testing on a person there, but that you go out and you actually talk to the customers in the actual environments where they are. That's becoming even more important for us as designers, as technologists, as every specific role. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Is there anything that we haven't clarified before I open it up to having more questions? Anybody have questions or little things that are, here we go. Let's go to Nina and let's go to Douglas real quick while we're here, and I'll run the mic back and forth. Nina, stand up, tell us your name, and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Nina. I'm a communications strategist specializing in digital.
In what industry?
I float around industries. Right now I'm doing consulting in the financial industry, but I've worked across many industries. My question is, thank you. My question is, I'm often find myself straddling the world of the designers as well as the marketers. And how do you go about helping to cause a shift in thinking for marketers? What I'm experiencing is the very old model of doing marketing. Blast your message into the marketplace in any way we can, send all those emails without really thinking about, as you're saying, how is the end user receiving it? Are we providing value? And then also, translating that into digital. How does their user experience going to be on their website? Why would people come? So I'm just curious as how you've all gone about creating conversations to cause that shift.
Excellent question. So how do I get my stakeholders that are more traditional to understand that from traditional marketing, or what I call aggressive dry humping?
It's a tricky question, and a lot of you have probably heard the phrase cross-functional teams. It's very popular now in digital settings because I think people have a better awareness of the fact that, hey, we're siloed and we're not working well together, and marketing has one perspective and the exec team has another and tech has another and the designers have another. And all of them are valid. They're just different ways of looking at the same problem. And I think that everyone has to work together in small teams at the same time, not in sort of like, you do this, then I'll do this, then I'll do this, in order to make it better. And I won't pretend that that's easy to affect in an organization, but that's what we're trying to do. That's what my company tries to do. We try to impart that mentality on our clients, and I don't really see any other way.
Right partners.
Yeah, I completely agree about the cross-functional teams, and I would actually even take it another step further. One of the projects that I worked on with Jose back when he was at the group was with a client of ours, the Edible Schoolyard. And we literally had Jose in the room, Barrett in the room, Chris Miller, one of my engineers in the room, and myself, as well as the client's executive team and marketing team, and getting us all in the room and making sure that the designers knew what we could record from an analytical perspective to give back to the executive stakeholders for tracking was something that their executives didn't really know, and the creatives didn't necessarily know either. But when we had all of the different cross-functional people in the room, the marketer might say, this is what my goal is. The creatives might say, okay, here's how we think we're going to achieve that goal from a design perspective and communications perspective. And then the developers would come back and say, okay, well, this is how we're going to execute that, and this is how we're actually going to track that. And if you didn't have all of those people in the room at the same time, it would have been a marketing person talking about goals, but not really understanding how they were going to be achieved. And then a creative guy sitting there going, okay, well, I think I'm going to do this, but he doesn't necessarily have any analytics behind testing what occurred. So the designer may not have known that you could do like multivariate testing, for example, as a way of tracking how well those creatives' assets were actually working. But having them all in the room at the same time, making sure that you're hearing from all those different voices makes a big difference, and I would strongly encourage that over, just the marketing guy coming up with the budget and objectives and then trying to kind of farm it out and not necessarily be involved or in the room when they're coming up with those strategies.
And that's a paradigm. That's a paradigm that is traditional in classic organizations that are hierarchical and that are siloed. Big challenge, and something that, while I walk over here to Kevin, I want to mention is that in January, end of January at Blind, we're launching a design accelerator, which is weekends or weekdays where we're doing the process that he's describing of everybody in the room with people like Scott, people, multidisciplinary teams doing it for nonprofits and for other types of clients that might benefit from it. And the goal of that is simply to show LA and to show our communities of multidisciplinary folks how it's done. So one of the challenges that you're going to have, Nina, is convincing people to do that in their organizations, but they will come and do it for a weekend, for fun, and say, ooh, this was good, and then bring it back to their organizations and replicate it. So by example, we're going to have to do it. But Kevin, stand up, tell us who you are, where do you work, and what do you do?
Hello, everybody. My name's Kevin. I'm actually a producer at an ad tech company, MediaMind, DG MediaMind. So I just wanted to piggyback on your question. Just wondering what the thinking of people on the panel is, like being campaign-based versus product-based, because campaigns, obviously have a shorter life cycle, and that's obviously going to influence the way teams are structured, how things roll out. It's just budgets, and just from a user experience perspective, you would think this is something if it's in your phone, it's part of your life. You're living with it. Whereas like a campaign, you're a billboard, you glance up, maybe it registers in the back of your mind. It's like things really have to stick more. They have to be, I don't know. You just have to consider the fact that people are living with the things that you're building more than, the assets that you might have built before.
So, any comments on that? What he's saying is interesting, because what's happening is that smart brands like Unilever and others, they're actually switching from campaign thinking to product thinking and using user experience and going into the homes of their customers, spending their traditional marketing dollars on developing a new product, Swiffer, for example, based on observation of the user, instead of, and you don't see a lot of marketing for it, you see some advertising, instead of creating a product and then marketing the hell out of it. So there's this, what will happen, in my prediction, is that based on what Scott said, that the future of all marketing will be user experience, high fidelity, high friction user experience in order to develop the product, not the messaging about the product. There's one company, the first company that I call the first 21st century company, and they do that here in LA at a place called Media Arts Lab. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? Apple. They do their user experience and their marketing and their hardware all at the same time versus doing it in sequence, and therefore they come out with the product as the message, not the other way around. But Douglas, you had to stand up, tell us who you are and your question.
Hi, Douglas, been doing with market share. So my question is to Chris around storytelling, and actually everybody here, and to follow on your question, we're seeing the same advertising, the same message repeated over and over. It's getting dull and boring. What can we do in terms of storytelling to, and we're in the land of law with screenwriters all around, what can we do to tie together this entire experience from a technological perspective, from a storytelling perspective, from a UX perspective, to create a narrative that engages versus just repeating the same story over and over again?
Brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. Thank you, Douglas. Chris Stowe. Yeah, good luck on that one. Well, what he's saying is,
That's a great question. Thank you.
How can we work, like, how can a screenwriter and a UX guy, how can a screenwriter, UX guy, and some tech guys, work together to develop something? So it's really a question of what do we do here in LA, or what do we end up doing if we're isolated in our own communities? Screenwriters are screenwriters, designers are designers. You can come to tech mornings.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to have an answer that's going to be able to satisfy that. Okay.
Right now as we speak.
Thanks, Jose.
We are. No. Well, what are we doing?
Well, I kind of look at it, this model of advertising about talking to somebody or trying to sell them something, I think would have been effective, or it was effective, kind of 20th century, 21st century. I think you either explain something to somebody or you document it, because it's so easy to validate if your claims are true or not. And that can happen as a 30-second piece of information, as it exists in a broadcast TV thing, or it could exist as a product that you use on your app. I think the more transparent you become and the more transparent the messaging is, I think the more likely you are to connect with a consumer or user. And so they want to be a part of the conversation and not just be talked to. So that's how I kind of look at it.
That's a great answer. So it is that instead of getting paid to do the script for a commercial that talks about, hey, here's how great the product is in a metaphoric way, that he's saying that there's going to be explanatory videos, or there's going to be applications that explain the product. Marketing ultimately is education about the product. The challenge where we're suffering is that in the 20th century we were selling commodity products that were mass manufactured and that needed to be moved quickly. So all the mechanics of 20th century marketing are discounts, sales, all those kind of things are there to move the product when it's manufactured in scale, versus to move a narrow channel of user or customer-based product like an iPhone. Notice, high price, low amounts, high margin product. That's a better model for product creation, in this case in hardware, in the 20th century. The same thing goes for services. The storage place that Chris is working on, why would a storage place invest on designing a beautiful experience and the touch points and everything being focused around the customer experience from end to end? So the narrative that you're going to be writing, and we can have this conversation afterwards offline, because I'm working on that with startups and with other companies, is a narrative across the user life cycle, and then you pick little points where you actually have technology, or you have processes, or you have the web, whatever it is, intermediating the processes that you're going through. So it's really, you're designing the movie now, and you're doing all the prop selection, and you're doing all the details that before were kind of left just to be inside a narrative. Now they're actually alive. Everything is alive. Diego, do you want to add anything to that?
I just remembered this other thing. Nest, the company that makes those really smart thermostats, they came out with a new smoke detector that is just that really caught my attention. And I think the way that they're speaking to me, I don't necessarily feel like I'm being marketed to, but I probably am, is somebody probably thought about the entire experience on the web and broke it down to little bite-sized pieces as you move through it, and they also embed really well-produced videos. So I think instead of looking at it like we'll make some videos and we'll build the site after, or building a site now we need video content, I think if you think about it as a whole, you'll probably have a much more successful solution to the problem. And that way I can dig deep into something, or I can just get the bullet points and jump down to I just need to buy this at this point.
Love it. So Chris and Diego, you guys have any comments on that, or Diego specifically?
Well, I remember reading in a sales book years ago the difference between a good salesperson and a pushy salesperson. And the difference is this: both of them push you, But the good salesperson truly thinks that he's bringing something to you that's going to make you be better off. So they'll both push, but one is trying to help you, the other one is just trying to make a sale, right? So when it comes to online experiences, I think it kind of maps in some ways in that, you know, a user experience that doesn't really understand who I am, what my needs are, where, you know, what my profile is, that doesn't understand its customers and how they're segmented, and what the right moment to give them the right messages is probably going to seem annoying, even if they vary their brand to make it more interesting, right? If I go and browse, say, I don't know, as a matter of example, on a camera website, and I'm looking at tripods, right? Then for me to keep getting 5 emails a day about camera specials is going to be annoying. But if, you know, at the right moments I get, you know, maybe an email about, hey, these are some cool ideas of things you can do with tripods that you didn't think about, maybe I'll click on that, I'll read it. I mean, it's not necessarily that example is good or bad, but the point is that I need to try and understand you. And that's why the personalization technology, you know, the cookies and making good use out of that is even more important. Instead of trying to use the cookies to invade someone's privacy, it's our job to try and make a better match for that customer.
Can I add to that? Yeah, one more thing to add.
sorry.
Let's wrap up.
I think that example that you just gave, Diego, about the tripod is really interesting. Instead of pushing that message out and just bombarding your inbox, I would buy that tripod if you explained to me how to use it and you did it with video and words and images. And so the more I know, the more I can make a decision if it's right for me. So I'm not being marketed to, I don't think. Just tell me how to use your product.
Any final thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, to your point, I think that Nest is probably the best example of what you just described I've ever seen. I actually bought one of the Nest products for my parents for Christmas last year. And one of the reasons I did, and my father is not a tech guy, all my nerdy brains came from Mom. And I was actually worried about, could my dad actually figure it out? And by going in and looking through all of their online video experience, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, Dad can actually figure that out. And it gave me a much more of a feeling like I was connected to that product, and then I truly understood what it was a lot more than just simply reading about what it was.
Great case study.
They probably took into consideration the very questions that you were having for your father. And so they were thinking about the end user and the potential customer saying, this looks too complicated, how do I use this? And then they wrote a script and produced something to address that very concern, right?
You are the future, Scott. That's the conclusion.
Well, I actually want to make a point a little contrary to that, which is that I think collaboration is the future for creating good products and good marketing. I think Apple is a prime example of having kind of that integration between marketing and production and design and technology. I would say that I occasionally play the creative role at my company, and I mostly play the user experience role, and they conflict a lot, right? So when I'm working with a visual designer and my responsibility on the project team is to be the usability guy, I am constantly shooting down creative ideas because they'll make the product less usable. And I think that that conversation, that friction between people coming from different perspectives is really what's critical, and you need to have that.
Having that friction.
Are you having the conflict with the designer because you define how it should be used and they ignore that and then they design something because it looks pretty, or they that's not to me like a very good designer, right? Maybe that's some of your frustration, right?
Insulting the designers. Well, with that insult, well, hold on a second. We need to wrap up so quickly.
Yeah. So this is my wrap-up question. This is my wrap-up question. Since it's still morning, I want to get back to the tech. Could each of you describe some piece of technology, whether it's hardware or software, that you're either using or implementing now that helps us sort of put design everywhere?
Interesting. So that's a tough question, but what is highlight a piece of technology that you think is important when it comes to this topic, this issue, that whether it's content management, whether it's psych or...
Well, I think that it's not quite there yet, but something that I see evolving is the ability for you to manage your native app content through web content management systems. So I think that is personally something that I think is so for example, you have a website and you have an HTML5 website. So for you like products, like for example, you can take Sitecore. Sitecore is a web content management system. There's a ton of them. There's the Adobe CQ. There's or I guess it's called Experience Manager now. There's Episerver. There's Drupal. Probably Drupal is one. Drupal and WordPress are the two most common ones. Everybody's aware of those. So I think
that's critical now.
Some of these are starting to come up with kits that allow you to, in essence, create little snippets of content that you can drop into your apps. So I think that's a good way of trying to keep some sense out of it all. But obviously it works against the desire to make your apps unique and to make full use of the hardware, right? But it's one way of managing the chaos. There's also cross-platform, toolkits out there. Like say there's a toolkit called Corona that allows you to make apps that work on different things. That's you probably know this one.
Mobile Roadie, which allows you to
well, there's some that will take an HTML5 application and just make an app out of it.
PhoneGap?
Yes, PhoneGap. That's what I was thinking of. There's Xamarin that allows .NET programmers to make.
You mentioned
so there's things at the technical level that help you do that. From the designer perspective, I think if the key is just to stick to basic UI constructs and not go crazy on the features. Again, that's the opposite of what we were saying before, that sometimes using the features in a device is better, right? But if you want to make a design truly ubiquitous, you got to kind of try and dumb it down.
Say it's really these different CMSs out there really look.
So the CMS has helped deliver across a lot of platforms. So what he's also saying, and I think that might get into an argument where people want to make design really interesting and creative, and what happened to creativity? Where are we? But the reality is that creativity now is 360. It's about empathy, and it's about creating the experience as a whole at multiple times, not necessarily in one instance on one screen, static to that layout or to that particular experience. So simplification, color, there's a lot of ways that I believe that we can use design to have it be easy across a lot of the different platforms, and that's a whole other a panel that would be really interesting, like design from that point of view. But we're running out of time, and I know John has something specific he is itching to say. So John, again.
Sorry, I can't shut up sometimes. So just in the last couple of questions, and then in this wrap up, I just have a quick comment. What I heard from you guys and what I found really effective as a tactic is training and cross-training. In my mind, UX and internet design is a holistic. It's not just print design. It's not just interaction design. It's not just engineering. And so I chalk it up as business, creative, tech as the very, very, very simple buckets to cross-train across. But I found a lot of value in both culturally changing your company, increasing communication efficiency. It's both an individual mandate as well as the organization has to support it too.
I love that, thank you. And I want to do some thank yous and some hands of applauses for a few people. Where's Alex Barcelona, the young lady right there who makes these events possible every other month? And also a hand of applause to our awesome panelists from Oshyn, Stauffer, Blind, and Philosophie.